Alright guys, so hey, first off, I wanted to tell you guys real quick because a lot of you guys have been asking me, well, why are car prices not going to go down? So I want to teach you two very basic concepts here. I'm going to try to do it in under 5 minutes. So first off, we have what we call an inflation based on demand and supply. This is what we call, for example, the G63 2021 market, right? The value, the MSRP was 176. The car went all the way up to 320. There was no real production reason why that occurred. It is a new car. Cars depreciate. This gap right here was strictly right here as a result of demand, which was to the roof. And for one reason, because credit allowed people to basically finance 320. So if you were going into financing, Mercedes would allow you to take a 280K loan on a 320K car. This was pretty exciting for you. So more demand went there. Now, in February, we saw that demand completely get crushed by credit guidelines changing, requiring you to put 100K down on that. That dropped that price all the way down to roughly about 250K. And then all the way down again to roughly 220K. But it pushed some of these older cars even further down. So I had said previously, if you were buying a G-Wagon 2019, 2020, 2021, you were going to ride this for a little bit, but this was going to crash. This is not a hack. This was just a temporary opportunity. If you sold your car, you did well. Congratulations. Now, let's talk for 1 second here about what's happening in the Lamborghini market as an example. You may have purchased a car in the past or looked at a car and it was 100K, right? Well, that car, that very same car you were looking at in your heart that was 100K is now 170K. You may have looked at 300K Aventador. That very same car now is trending somewhere around 450K. So there's a significant disparity. There's 2 points we're going to look at here. The first one is, if this car is 100 to 170K, how do I know it's not coming back? Well, one simple thing happened. Money got devalued. So here's how that works. So your dollar, right, used to buy $1. Okay, now your dollar buys 70 cents. And then further down, 60 cents. So what does it mean? It means that the cost of your good has to go up to readjust to this. Now, how does this all work? Well, simply put, this is maybe complex. We're not going to get into economics. I'll explain it to you in a simpler way. You own a home, and a home goes up in value. We know that, and we know certain places go up in value more than other places, right? Nothing new there. What you're not knowing or perhaps paying attention to is that your home isn't the only one that went up. Everybody's home went up. So because everybody's home went up, we all got richer, right? And when we all get richer, here's what happens to luxury goods. Your luxury could cost 100K. Your grandma had a 600K home. That home's worth $1 million. She's now a millionaire, right? Okay, your grandma's buying power went up. So did everybody else's. Because everybody's buying power went up, well, the price of luxury goods also went up to readjust again to the same people that could afford the same good. So technically, all that happened is a new baseline was formed. It's not that the car cost went up, it's that the baseline of money went up. So therefore, what was 100K then is 170. If we look at the car market, it's no different than saying, why did a Gallardo used to have 150K MSRP versus a Technica has a 300K MSRP? Technically, it's the same car in the same lineup. Well, there's product costs, there is cost of metals, there's just a baseline of the cost of money. So 150K then, who could afford this is the equivalent to who can afford this now. And what you have to understand with these cars and the way these things work, these stacks work, is that all you're doing here, when we talk about cars coming back to their old sake, that's not possible. Because for this car to go back to this, right, to go back to the 100K, it would basically mean that today, in today's language, that it was worth 70K back then. So it's even worse, like it doesn't make sense. So the 170 is that. And depending on the car, if you're buying a car such as, for example, an Aventador or a gated car or something, that number is just going to keep going up, not going down. Now, if you're buying a G-Wagon, that number adjusted itself, but it's still trending down because it's a regular, non-hackable car in sense of you can get a good deal on it, you can lower your cost of ownership, but you can't get in and out completely free and add miles like you could in exotics. So the point is, the wealth gap from where you were to where you need to go to get to your dream has just extended to become the same. Now, the more expensive you get, like the Aventador, for example, 300 to 450, that's $150,000 difference, right? And one of the things people don't understand in economies like this is that wealth gaps get even larger because of one thing. And that one thing is called, you ready for this? A contingency. You see, when you buy a 500K home, you rely on a bank to finance that home. When someone buys a $3 million home, they rely on cash. So the contingency is the bank. So what happens is when you're going for a 500K home, the bank is relying on that to make an appraisal and all these other things. When you're buying a $3 million home, you're usually going in with significantly more cash. So these contingencies aren't necessarily here. One of the things to understand in this very easy to understand scenario is that as these things go up, the feds come in and regulate this. And they say, if you're not really rich, well, guess what? We're going to raise interest rates to make it harder for you to buy, to slow down the market. If you're really rich, well, that doesn't really matter because you're paying cash anyway, so who gives a shit? Now, you might say, well, that's unfair. Why would they restrict our ability to buy, but not rich people? Because rich people are buying with their money and their risk. When you, a normal person that makes and is buying a 600K home or $1 million home and are getting a 600K loan from the bank, you are using basically the bank's money. So the feds are regulating the bank risk to ensure that you're not exposing the bank to some significant catastrophe. But if a person uses their own money, like I want a $3 million house, I have $2 million down, it doesn't matter what gets wiped. If my house goes to 1.5 million in value by a crash market, my cash gets wiped, not the bank. And the government says, you know what, I don't care if PJ gets poor. What I care about is to ensure that the livelihood of the bank isn't exposed to some exponential risk, because as the Fed, I will then bail out, like we saw in 2008, I will bail out the bank in order to ensure that the system works. But if PJ loses his cash, the Bitcoin, cars, watches, and everything else, I just don't give a shit. So this is basically the gist of why basic economics mean that in times of crazy inflation and crazy devaluation of cash, and more importantly, of restrictions of credit, you're going to see this dynamic shift. So these $3 million houses are based on cash. There's a lower supply of them. They're going to keep going up. I'm going to keep making millions of dollars. That guy's going to get harder to buy his house because the bank's limiting his money. And that's where I get a lot richer and he can't move forward. So he will blame the fact that the Feds has prevented his ability to participate, when in reality he has to blame himself for not being able to participate because of his lack of cash. So this is the gist of what is happening in the entire car industry and why we are no longer going to see 80, 90K Gallardo values ever again. So get used to it. Start playing in the car game before it's too late and before you miss the 150K mark and then have to pay $250 for the very same car.